Collins & Co invite you to join us for our regular lunchtime not-for-profit seminars and workshops. In these sessions, guest speakers deliver expert knowledge on topics specifically catered for the not-for-profit sector. Sessions are held at Collins & Co from 12 till 2 and lunch is provided. Contact Collins & Co to find out the next seminar topic and to register.
Hi, I'm Dr. Erica Myers-Tattersall. I'm the Director of Exponential Fundraising, and today I'm going to talk about show me the money. How do you fundraise? Everything that you ever wanted to know about fundraising but were too frightened to ask, I will explain everything today.
I'm going to let Erica kind of introduce herself. I find that presenters are best at talking around their background and the skill sets that they bring to these sessions. So I'll hand over to you, Erica.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, make sure your phones are off, because if your phone goes off, it's a $100 fine to my favourite charity. Okay, so the title, someone actually said that to me when they called up to say, could we help them? We really just need someone with lots of money to write us a big cheque. Sadly, that doesn't really happen unless you know them very well. But sometimes it can happen, and I'll show you how. So I'm going to talk, I'll introduce myself, talk a little bit about the sector, philanthropy in Australia more broadly, and then how you're going to find the money and some practical steps you can take. So I work for the Xponential Group. There are several divisions in our portfolio. So I look after the orange one, Exponential Fundraising. So we do day-to-day operational fundraising 101. So that's anything from writing an appeal letter, setting up a bequest program, market research, donor acquisition, appeal letters, that sort of thing. Exponential Giving, they do strategy and campaigns for faith-based organisations, so where the word is the message, if you know what I mean. So those that have a very strong sort of Christian sort of message in their organisation. Exponential Philanthropy, that's the part of the group that does all of the multi-million-dollar fundraising campaigns, so typically new buildings. So for example, here in Melbourne, the new Victorian Cancer Comprehensive Centre, while it was predominantly funded by government, because it's about $1 billion project, 55 million of that was raised through our firm, through this team here. And Exponential Strategy, as the name says, all about strategy, a lot of work around governance and working with boards and coaching and mentoring in the big gift space. So me, I've spent about 10 years in the not-for-profit sector, predominantly mental health, maternal and child health, community services, and I've been a CEO as well as a head of fundraising. I've also got 10 years commercial experience as well, so I've worked in travel, tourism, entertainment and financial services, and I've actually worked globally around the world, so I've seen lots of different things, but predominantly Australia, UK, Europe and international business development across, mainly across developing countries. But the key things you need to know about me is I'm an ideas person. I'm quite lazy, but I'm very good at ideas. I do like a challenge, so usually the weirdest phone calls usually come through to me like, yeah, she says they just want to find someone who'll give them the money. That call will come through to me. And the doctoral research that I did looked at social enterprises in developing countries to see was there anything we could learn from those organisations. I had run a couple of social enterprises here in Melbourne, and I was interested to see, often we have this view that perhaps developing countries don't know anything, but I take a view from my experience, they often know more than we do. And I had a look at, did they work, particularly in countries where there is no welfare to fall back on. So that was the basis of my research. Okay. So just a little bit about the not-for-profit sector. So as you can see, Australians love the coast, we like the beach, and not-for-profits essentially mirror where the Australian population, so pretty much all around the coastline. And there are around about just under 54,000 not-for-profits in Australia right now. And when we look at their income, $42 billion comes from government grants. 6.8 billion comes from donation and bequests, and 54.5 billion comes from revenues. That might be membership fees, it might be sales income, fee for service. 64% of not-for-profits don't get government income. Government is actually the biggest donor in the country. Donations contribute to about 13% of the total income of large charities. Now, the ACNC, it's quite bizarre the way that they've classified not-for-profits, but large charities are those that have an income of $1 million or more. 23% for medium charities and 32% for small charities. But overall, in Australia, they have a combined income of $103 billion. Anyone surprised by that number? No. You all knew that? Surprised? Not surprised? Are you wondering where your bit of that 100 billion is? And again, when we look at employment of charities, 4 out of 5 charities have volunteers, which is probably not a surprise. But the not-for-profit sector employs over 1 million staff, which actually makes us quite substantial when you consider Australia's population is only about 24.5 million. 44% of charities operate with no paid staff. So that's starting to tell you that most charities are tiny, very, very small. So if you're small, you're in good company. So again, small, large and medium. So large charities who make up 19% of all charities, as I said, they're classified as those that have an income of over $1 million. Medium are those that have an income of around about 250,000 to $1 million, and small have an income of less than 250,000. So the majority of charities in Australia turn over less than 250,000, so tiny. And interestingly, when we look at DGR, do you all know what DGR status is? Anybody not know what DGR is? Okay, so DGR, it's when you give a donation to a not-for-profit and they give you back a receipt, you're able to claim your donation against your tax return if they have DGR. If they don't, then you're unable to make that claim. And it's quite challenging to get DGR, can take you anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And it's issued by the tax office. So not all charities have DGR. In fact, only 40% have DGR. And again, I understand that that's all changing as well. So at the moment, if you get DGR status, you get it for life. It's actually going to change where it's going to be time limited, so you'll have to keep reapplying for it. But you can see that the majority of charities that have got DGR are the larger ones. So although they don't make up as many, you can start to see that they're the ones who are actually raising most of the money. So this is just a bit of blurb, and I'm happy to send this presentation to you if you want a copy of it. But in essence, about 66% of Australians made a donation in the 2015-16 tax year. We don't have any more data from then because the tax office hasn't released it. But it's around about 75 million that Australians will give to the not-for-profit sector. And in over the last in the 15-16 year, we saw that there were 46 gifts of more than $1 million were made. So just 46 at $1 million. So it's not a lot of people, it's not a lot of gifts. But the largest gift that was left was $3 billion. And that was actually the Paul Ramsay bequest that was left to the Ramsay Health Foundation. So when we look at people who are wealthy and how much they give, according to the ATO, less than 63% of people who earn more than $1 million donate to charity. So Australia thinks it's generous, but it's kind of not. But that said, there has been a rise in giving and in volunteering to charities as well. There's also more of an emphasis now on what we call planned giving, which is where if someone's going to give, whether it's a $10,000 gift or a $100,000 gift, they actually plan it as opposed to, I got a letter in the post and I'll just give you a donation. They're sort of starting to now sit down and plan, okay, let's set up a private trust, and we're now going to sort of decide which organisations or sectors we want to give to, and we're now planning that out. And we do see that those who plan their giving give 6 times as much as those who are ad hoc. So this now tells us that donor relationships are really important. That said, public trust is slipping for charities. And on the trusted institutions, according to the ACNC, charities have moved from the 3rd most trusted institutions to the 5th. But maybe after the Royal Banking Commission, we might go back up again. Anybody surprised by anything on this?
Who are the first
public trust is slipping. Is interesting.
Yeah. Who are the ones that are above?
I can't remember, but I can find out. I think it was like doctors and I think it might have been hospitals, doctors, something like that. But yeah, not definitely not banks and not. Can I get rid of that thing? Not. And I think there've been a few. There've been some major scandals in the UK around fundraising, and here there's been a bit of a pushback around telemarketing and street fundraising. So I think that sort of contributed to the loss of public trust. Philanthropy has increased since the GFC, which is great. And what we're seeing is a change in the way that people are giving. So things like endowment funds, crowdfunding, PAFs, which are the full name is a private ancillary fund. So think of it as a private family trust. So these were set up, I think, towards the end of the Howard era. And in essence, you need at least around $500,000 to $700,000 to set one up. You put the money in and you have to distribute every year a minimum amount. It's about $11,000 or about, I think, 4%, whichever's the smallest. All the money in the trust can only be given to a not-for-profit with DGR status. This is where DGR it becomes very important. And we're seeing more families setting these sorts of trusts up, and the families then run a committee and they'll decide, and this is where planned giving comes in, they'll decide where they're going to give their donation to. But when we look at the total number of bequests and the amounts given across the board, it's around about $315. And the median bequest, so that's somebody leaving a gift to a charity in their will when they pass away, is around about $36,000 is the median amount that we see. We know this just from our working practice as fundraisers. People who are older give more. It's just the reality of that. So people who are sort of 60, 65 plus give more. They've got more disposable income. They usually don't have kids at home. It may start to change as we see that families are having children later. So you're now starting to see grandparents having their first grandkids when they're 70 and 80, having little ones. So that may start to change. And we're also starting to see the baby boomers are spending their money as well. They're not going to leave it for the kids. But typically we do see that people who are over 65 give more and they're still giving. And we're seeing more credit card and FPOS donations, although I have to say at a few places that I've worked at, we still see a lot of cheques. And I did a campaign this year for what I considered quite a young brand, a sports-based organisation. We did an appeal at the beginning of the year, and I was quite surprised that when we did the direct mail appeal, we got more cheques and money orders than we did credit card slips, which I found really intriguing, given that the organisation's only 30 years old. It's got a very youthful brand. So people are still writing cheques. And in terms of giving, donations and bequests still account for the largest proportion of giving, while sponsorships are at around 16%, corporate donations at 10%, trusts and foundations, so that's grants, 5%, and then other fundraising, so things like op shop sales or events, lotteries, account for about 22%. But I know you just want this bit. The other stuff was kind of boring. So I'm just going to take you through now some different ways that we fundraise and the different sources of money. But before we do that, I want you to have a think about your own giving. So when you give a donation yourself, what makes you give that donation? So what's the trigger? So anybody want to share?
Emotion.
Emotion, okay. So is it some sort of emotional connection to the cause?
It doesn't
or that it makes you cry?
Yeah. It's more the fact that it makes you feel emotional, I think.
Okay.
Rather than necessarily having a connection with it.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? What makes you want to give? Or think about the last gift that you gave. Why did you give it?
Personal circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
So, say someone who's had a particular illness and you see a charity raising money for that particular illness. It makes you more inclined to give it because you've got that connection. You've got a connection with it.
Okay. Michael, your last donation.
I'm on the board.
Yeah, you're on the board. Okay, that's a good reason. We like boards that give. Yes.
I'd say values. If like a charity aligns with my values, I'm more likely to donate to them. But also reputation as well of that charity.
So values, reputation, personal connection on the board, trigger an emotional response. Anybody else that's got a different reason for the last gift that you gave?
If the charity's got a compelling story.
So a compelling story, seeing the impact of their work.
Yeah.
Timing would be another one.
What's that?
Timing.
Timing. So you just happen to come into some money and you're able to give it away? Is that right? Or?
So when you see that message, or when you see that appeal to give, for example, I know that people are more prone to spend their money more in the evenings than first thing in the morning, because they've already gone through the entire day, and those constraints that they probably would have had in the beginning are kind of worn down a bit throughout.
Sure. And also, more broadly, tax time is actually the most popular time to give in Australia. It's May, June. Anybody else? Last gift that you gave, the reason for giving that we haven't mentioned?
Some of them might be local, so they might be place-based. They're in your local neighbourhood or local area. It might be a friends group, or historical society or something like that.
Oh, who's the $100 fine? Oh, you got one of those old school digital watches, right? Anyone else? You don't give. Do you give? Not everybody gives.
It might be like making a political statement, like donating to your favourite political party or local member or something.
So that, again, maybe sharing the same values and beliefs that you do. Okay. This is always important to think about your own giving, particularly if you're trying to come up with a fundraising campaign. Think about the things that motivate you to give. But I'll give you some reasons. We've mentioned probably most of them. So the main reasons that people give is because they're asked to. That's really important. You've got to ask. And they're presented with an opportunity that motivates them to give. So when you think about the reasons why you give, that's your motivation, but you do have to ask for that gift. People give because they hate to say no face to face. That's why street fundraising works so well. I know quite a few people don't like it, but it is so effective at securing income, particularly if you're looking for younger donors. But what we do know is that the chance for success is even better when the donor's asked by someone that they know and respect. So at a major gift level, if we're looking to secure a big gift from someone, so if that's $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever, we do what we call a peer-to-peer ask. So we'll find someone that they know who'll do an introduction, and we'll get them to make the ask for us on behalf of the organisation, and that's very, very successful. People give to control where the money's going and how it's used. So that's where we see tied donations. And typically, if you're applying to a trust and foundation, you're going to ask for money for a particular project, and it's going to be spent in that way. As we mentioned, people support what they believe in. They truly want to make a positive difference. They give because someone's made it easy and convenient to. So, for example, when we do a direct mail campaign, we always include a reply paid envelope. Sounds really stupid, but if we don't include a reply paid envelope, most people it'll sit on the kitchen bench, and I've got to go and get an envelope now, and I've got to go down to the post office and buy a stamp, then I've got to get it to the post box. It's probably not going to happen, so we always include a reply paid envelope. If you're doing an email campaign, a link that takes you straight through to the donation site. Tax laws, DGR. Particularly at a higher level, it's for those larger gifts, people will structure their giving around tax laws. So the private ancillary funds I mentioned before that we're seeing families set up now, they are all completely structured around tax laws. So, for example, one of my colleagues at Morgan Stanley was telling me that, a family he was working with set up this private ancillary fund. So, as I said, you have to give the money to charity. So it sounds like, they're really altruistic. They want to put $1 million into a trust that can only be given to a charity. Doesn't that sound amazing? No, he was going for a divorce and wanted to hide some money that he didn't want his ex to get hold of. And it was a way of locking that money away, that if she can't have it, no one can have it. So the money can only go to a not-for-profit. So there are different motivations as to why people give, but do remember that tax is one of them. People give because they want to be remembered or they want to leave a legacy, particularly bequests. So people leaving a gift in their will, they want to, they want someone to remember that they were here on planet Earth and that they made a difference. So these are some of the main reasons that we see why people give. So these are good things to remember when you're coming up with your campaigns, when you're going to think about how you're going to motivate someone. So you're going to talk to them about, look, Bobby, you've been a volunteer here for a long time, and wouldn't you like to, leave a legacy for other volunteers, and perhaps you're going to, we'll have this room named after you, and it's going to be the volunteer tea room, and for $10,000 we can do that. It's that sort of thing. And the other thing we're seeing is the way that donors want to be involved. So where we probably saw it years ago at the high level with people giving larger gifts, we're now even seeing it at the smaller level. So people giving $50, $100, $200 gifts. And so they're changing the way that they donate. So we're seeing things like I've mentioned before, crowdfunding and giving circles. So the collective giving. So for example, in Melbourne, we've got Impact 100. Has anybody heard of Impact 100? So Impact 100 is essentially 100 people that kick in $1,000 each, that creates a pool of $100,000. They then go out almost to tender to not-for-profits. They'll choose a sector one year. It might be the environment, might be children, and they'll invite not-for-profits to put an application in. They'll whittle it down to about 5 or something, provide them with, develop a video for them and bits and pieces, and on the night, it's almost like X Factor, they'll pitch to those 100 people on the night why they should get the $100,000. But what they've realised is that, $1,000 may not make that much impact, but if I join up with 99 other people, we can actually now have a $100,000 gift that could make a massive impact, particularly to a smaller group. So if we think about donors, they want to make a difference and they want to change the world in whatever way that looks like. So if we look at when you're preparing your campaigns or your pitches, make sure that you know what you want the money for. Might sound really sort of basic, but sometimes not knowing what you want the money for, and a question that I often ask if people come to sort of ask for our help, is if we found someone right now that would write you a check for $1 million, what would you spend it on? And if you can't tell me an answer within 10 seconds, Houston, we have a bit of a problem. So that means we really need to articulate, what is the vision of the organisation? What would $1 million do for you right now? What would $50,000 do for you right now? What would $10 million do for you right now? So having that goal shows that you're prepared. And it also, I know that in sort of Western cultures, we have a little bit of an issue around asking for money. And that some of us feel a bit embarrassed and a bit awkward, and we don't really like to it seems like we're begging and all that sort of stuff. For people who want to invest in charities, so our donors, they don't think like that at all. For them, giving is a joy, and they see you as giving them an opportunity to experience that joy. And if you look at an MRI scan of someone when they make a donation, you actually can see that people get a high from giving. So don't ever feel like you can't ask, and particularly if somebody is a philanthropist and they give anyway, they're expecting you to ask. Why have you called this meeting? Why are we here? So make sure that that you treat them with respect and that you make an ask. They're expecting it, but be prepared, and that you've got all the information that you need. And the project that you want to deliver, whether it's a new wing on your building, or some new equipment, or whatever it is that you want to do. Projects that are more tangible, even if it's for salaries, if you can sort of say, look, we really need to fund a salary to have a worker, because if we get this worker in, it means that we can now see 50 more beneficiaries than we'd be able to see right now. That's tangible. And also urgency. So you need to sort of get across the urgency. So for example, if we're doing a direct mail campaign at tax time, we use June 30th as our urgency. That you've got to get your donation in by then, so that you can claim your generosity on your upcoming return. That's the sort of language that we would use. So if your project doesn't seem particularly urgent and it's not very tangible, you need to rethink what you're doing and reposition it so that it does become more tangible and there's a sense of urgency that if we don't get this money in the next 3 months, this project, can't happen, which means that we can't help X number of children to do X, whatever it is that we want them to do. When you're with somebody who is likely to give you something, take your cues from them. So we do in our own training and when we work with clients, we do a bit of role playing to help people sort of overcome their fears and whatever else around talking with donors. But really it's about listening, which is why we've got a picture of an ear there. So we talk to them about their giving, what do you want to achieve? What do you want your legacy to be? You've been involved with us for a long time now. What do you think we should be doing? You've seen our strategic plan, we want to, sort of grow and do X, Y, and Z. How does that relate to what you're doing? So if you think about a donor relationship, like any other relationship, that you listen to the other person, take on board what they're saying, and see, where your organisation can fit in with that. So we talk about listening your way to big gifts. We've identified through our own experience and research different types of donors. And by talking to them and getting to know them, we sort of start to work out what type of donor they sort of fit into, and that means that we will tailor our proposals or our pitch to that donor type. So the communitarians, for them, doing good makes sense. This is the right thing to do. I'm in this community. I'm seeing this thing happening over here, and I really believe this. This makes sense. We should be doing this. The devouts, so typically faith-based people. So doing good is God's will. So again, we would talk to them in quite a different way. If they're spiritual or go to have a particular religion. Investors, these are the people that want the business plan. They want it all laid out. They want the return on investment. You usually have to do a lot more work with these people, a lot more things in writing. But for them, their donation is all about this is good business. So they want to see a good business case as to why why I should support your project. Socialites, these are the people that typically put on the big gala balls and all that sort of thing. For them, doing good is fun. So it's not necessarily about, it's my charity work for a good cause, and half the time they don't even know what the charity is. But for them, it's a way, I guess it's fun and it's a bit of a status thing. So, it's the ladies who lunch, it's that sort of group. Altruists, 9%, doing good for them just feels right. It feels right, and they genuinely are altruistic. Not especially sort of so concerned by things like tax. But this for them is right. The repayers, doing good in return. I was homeless once, and now I'm in a really great space. I've got some money, and I'd really like to repay the salvos because they helped me out when I was down on my luck. The repayers. And the dynasts, doing good is a family tradition. So if you think of like the Meyer family, the Beeson family, some of the big sort of families in Melbourne who've actually got big family foundations, and they're now the 4th, 5th, 6th generation that are continuing on the work from their ancestors. So where can you find the money? So these are the areas that we would look for money. So corporates, individuals, trusts and foundations, government, and other community groups. So if you're looking for corporate support, you need to look at developing quite structured programs. In a way, these are the guys who are more like the investors. So they want to see stuff in writing. They want to see, what's the return on investment. And ultimately, they want to see that your organisation or your project aligns with their values and their company objectives. If we're looking for big gifts in this space, we typically look at the marketing department, and we go to the marketing department for, if we're looking for sort of substantial gifts, rather than the philanthropy or CSR. So CSR is corporate social responsibility. We tend to find the budgets are quite small, so maybe you're getting like a $5,000 or a $10,000 gift. Whereas if you want to sort of get, 50, 100 plus, then it's the marketing department. And if you think about advertising, so whether you're putting a one-page ad in a newspaper, spending money online, or paying for an ad during the ad break of MasterChef, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, for that kind of ad space, and that's where the money is. So The downside to that, if you go into the marketing budget, you're looking then to very much to be aligned with the company objectives, and potentially you're looking at at you being not being part of their organisation, but I guess the partnership is around the two brands. Whereas if you sort of just want a donation and then you take the money and then you don't really want to have much of a relationship, go for CSR and the philanthropy or the staff foundation. But when you're going to corporates, have a look at, can your project, could you do with some in-kind contributions, cash and time? Do they do something that perhaps you need? So, could they develop your strategic plan, for example? Could they do a feasibility study for you? Is there some piece of work that they could do, like some legal advice or accounting or whatever, that actually will save you some money as well? So look for those sorts of things. Also look to leverage staff contributions. So do they have a payroll giving program? Will they match staff donations, if staff give to you? And as I said, these guys, that they want everything in writing. So, and also if you want to continue the relationship, you need to take an account management sort of view of this. And so you'll need to do measurement and reporting, one, to improve your own program, but also to ensure that you can sort of justify the relationship. Because remember, often the person signing the cheque isn't usually the top boss, and sometimes they have to justify what they're doing to their boss. So you need to give them everything that will help support them do that. And we've seen a real change over the last probably 25, 30 years in corporate support. So where, sort of years ago it was all about giving back, it was strategic philanthropy was sort of one of the words we were hearing, and businesses fulfilling community obligations. It sort of turned into this CSR, which is about minimising harm, and businesses being responsible. And now what we're seeing is shared value. So finding business opportunities in social problems. How can our business? So a great one that we've got in South Australia, where we've got a not-for-profit that's involved in. They take donated food and redistribute it to people that don't have food. They collect food from all over the state. One of the corporates there runs a series of retail stores, a bit like 7-Eleven type stores, and they do coffee in their stores. And they have, with their coffee, you get coffee grounds. So they have to dump about 250,000 used coffee grounds every year. And they pay, I think, what was it? They did tell me how much, but it's a significant amount of money they pay every year to dump, to put that into landfill. So our guys at the food place, they said that they in the meantime met a fertiliser company. Sounds really random. The fertiliser company said, look, we love what you do. We're just wondering, if we were to give fertiliser to farmers and they grow a higher yield, perhaps they could donate the yield to you, because we do work with farmers and collect stuff straight from farms. But it was all getting a bit too hard, because how would you measure that, right? And blah blah blah. Anyway, we came up with the idea of with the retail store, if you take the coffee ground, you can actually use it and turn it into fertiliser. So between the two corporates, so one can make fertiliser. This retailer has got 250,000 kilos of coffee grounds that they have to pay to get rid of, that now that they're going to have a massive saving because they can give them to our guys. They'll turn them into fertiliser. They're then going to brand the fertiliser with the charity's name on it, and they'll actually now start making some money off a product that they don't even have to make. So it's that kind of finding opportunities in social problems, and creating social and organisational value. Our next area, trust and foundations. So there's around about 5,000 trust and foundations in Australia that give about $500 million a year. These include the private ancillary funds I was talking about. So these are the ones that tend to be family trusts. There are public versions of those, which essentially means that instead of setting up your own private one, which has a lot of compliance, you can just say if you had $100,000, you could put it into a public one, and basically they manage it all for you. And public funds are able to fundraise with the general public, whereas private ones aren't able to. And then 2,000 charitable trusts and foundations. So typically, and certainly with charitable trusts and foundations, there's an application process. So I'm sure some of you would have put some grant applications in, so maybe using Smarty grants or whatever else. Some of them do encourage relationships, some just don't, so I can think of Perpetual being one, they're not particularly interested in having a relationship with you individually as a not-for-profit. So it's really important to understand the type of trust that you're dealing with. So if it's someone like Perpetual trustees, who manage about, probably 500 or 600 different trusts, they're what I call a fiduciary organisation. So it's, it's a trustee company. It's very much a formal process that you go through. You get no feedback when you put your application in. They make you wait 6 months before they tell you, and that's it. It's very much a hands-off relationship. Whereas if you go with a family trust or even a corporate trust, typically you're more likely to have a relationship or be able to start a relationship with those types. So when you go to a fiduciary type organisation, they pretty much want facts and figures. They want facts, figures, they want you to back up what you're saying. They're all about risk management. So a lot of the time they always ask you about, what's the risk? How are you mitigating the risk of this project? Whereas family and corporates, they want to hear more of the emotions behind it. They want to hear the story. What's the impact? They're quite happy to be moved by emotions, but the fiduciary ones don't care about, how many little kids you helped. They want to know, does your board have a risk management process in place? Have you considered the environment that you're in? Have you considered the next 5 years that the environment, the financial environment might change, and how have you planned for that? So when you're putting your applications together, it's really important to remember that you have to write these quite differently, depending on if it's fiduciary or family and corporate. Government, as I mentioned before, government is Australia's biggest donor. And unless your organisation has an ethical reason not to accept government money, which some do, they want to remain independent, I always say you should be asking government for money, particularly for core services, because you need to keep the lights on with what you do, and it's very hard to get money for lights on from regular donors. So if you do want to approach government, they're looking for solutions. You present them with the issue, and then you present them with the solution. And you really want to become the trusted expert, so that when something comes up, they call you. Erica, you're, for example, like I was CEO for Australian breastfeeding. So call up. Okay, we've got a maternal child health issue. Can you give us, one of the advisors would call me up and say, what are your thoughts on this? You've got 15,000 members. What are they saying? How would this impact them, et cetera, et cetera? So, for example, like we lobbied, this is a long time ago, but we lobbied for paid maternity leave, for example, and sort of positioned ourselves as, somebody that you could come and ask, because we had access to all of these members. Always look at local, state and federal governments, because they've all got funding. So your local council will have funding. It may not be heaps, but you should have a look. If you're based in the City of Melbourne, for example, you can apply for $3,000 for your volunteer group. And I don't think you need DGR. So often councils, you may not need DGR status, and you can apply to them for funding. And so you should, and certainly your board at least, should have some kind of government relations strategy. So even if you don't take money from them, or you're not looking for money from them, you should have some sort of, what is your relationship with government, and actually have that documented. And then community groups. So service clubs like Rotary, Sir Optimus, Lions, Scouts, churches, schools and Zonta. These are all really great areas if you're not already tapping into to fundraise. Typically, they are not. They'll give you money whether you've got DGR status or not. They can also be great advocates for your cause because they've got huge networks that they can go out to, and they can increase your reach and increase your message. They also, you may be able to provide some volunteering opportunities for them. So if you're looking for volunteers, you could reach out to one of these groups. And particularly what we find, the research is telling us that if somebody is a volunteer and a donor, they give twice as much as somebody who's a non-volunteer donor. So it's really important that you have, when you're working with your volunteers, that you are asking them for donations. Okay, so just a few practical steps. So when you're working with existing donors, or you're about to bring on board some new ones, have a plan in place. So if someone gives you $50, what happens next? Does someone make a phone call? Do they get a thank you letter? Do they get an invitation to an event? How often are you going to get in touch with them? Is it just at appeal time? Because if it is, you'll lose them. How are you engaging with them in between? If someone gives you $10,000, who makes a phone call? Do you make a phone call? Do you put their name on the wall? Do you acknowledge them? Do you recognise the gift? Like, what are the steps that you're taking with each donor? So when we plot out a donor journey, we will sort of segment donors into, brand new first-time gift, maybe, those donors that have given, say, between $0 and $1,000, those who've given us in kind, those who've given us more than $1,000, we might class as major gift, and we'll have a different sort of strategy for each one of how we manage them when they come on board. Talk to them, share your news, and use different media. And again, this is actually asking them, how do you want to be communicated with? Do you prefer email? Do you like letters? I'm always slightly sus about email because emails don't get opened. I think if you get between 25 to 45% open rate, that you're doing really well. And we certainly find that when we do an appeal, letters always work better consistently by a huge shot. So I think a campaign we did this year where we got less than 1% response from existing donors via email. We tested it. We got 15% response when we sent letters to that group. So think carefully about how, if you're going to do lots of emails, will they read them? If you're sharing news that way, they're going to, So I would always say at some point in that 12-month period, there should be either a phone call or some kind of post to know that you have touched them in some way and it hasn't just gone through junk mail and they've not seen your news. Your board needs to be involved in fundraising. You cannot do fundraising without your board. You will fail miserably without your board. So, you may do well, but the most successful organisations have their board involved in fundraising. Now, that may not necessarily be the board making asks, because board members freak out because they think, but I'm just giving up my time and I'm doing governance. It could be opening the doors for you, introducing you to, people that can count. It could be stewardship, where you might not have time to make, 100 phone calls to say thank you. Split that between 10 board members, that's 10 calls each. They can call and say thank you for you. But boards it's vital that boards are involved in fundraising. It's not a solo job. So your CEO, if you're not the CEO, and the chair at the very minimum should be involved in fundraising, and at least in this area here, in networking, stewardship, and solicitation. If you don't have one already, you need a database to manage your fundraising, and particularly to manage the donor journey, because you can't really do that on paper when as donations come through. So you can actually, using a database, you can segment the different groups that you've got. You can then, have different, depending on how sophisticated you go, you can actually get the database to sort of give you the reminders of when you need to contact people, all that sort of stuff. Your database at the bare minimum should be able to process your donations and receipt them for you. Should be able to have all of your contact details of your donors, and should have some kind of notes function where you can actually start to put in diary entries or notes around when you meet donors, where you can actually sort of start to notate, okay, well, met Mrs. Smith on Monday, we had a chat about X, Y and Z, so that in 3 months' time, when you want to sort of touch base with Mrs. Smith or she sends you a donation, you can put on the note, oh yeah, how's your grandson? Because you said he was, he wasn't doing so well, or congratulations, or whatever. And it's those personal touches that help to lift your donations. And also ask colleagues or peers in the sector who you may know who are either in fundraising and other not-for-profits for help and advice. My experience of the not-for-profit sector is that, it's very collegial. So most people are happy to sort of share and to help you out. And then, so major donors who volunteer for a cause give much more. So, so again, knowing who your volunteers are is really important, and making sure that you ask. And I'm not saying you have to directly say, you must give me some money, but are you giving volunteers an opportunity to give? So do they get a volunteer pack when they join? In that pack, is there at least a leaflet in there that says, if you want to make a donation, you can. If you want to give a monthly gift, you can. Have you given them that opportunity? And certainly something around bequests as well. Questions? Thank you.